I still remember the sound that changed our lives. Not a scream, not a cry, just a quiet, broken whisper from my son. Mom, make it stop. He was 13, tall enough to reach the top shelves now, old enough to almost look like a young man. But that night, he curled into my lap like he did when he was 3, shaking so hard I could feel his heartbeat to my shirt. And the part that still rips me open, I didn't know what he wanted me to stop. The noise? The lights? The memory? The fear? The world? All I knew was this: if I didn't figure it out soon, something inside him was going to break. And for the first time in years, I realized this wasn't just another meltdown. This was something much darker, something no one prepared us for, something that would change our family forever. It was late November in Maple Ridge, a quiet middle-class suburb in Pennsylvania. Cold air seeped through the windows, rattling the thin panes. The house smelled of reheated pasta and lavender detergent, our attempt at calm. Streetlights flickered outside, casting long yellow shadows across the living room. I had just finished folding blankets when the first tremor started. Not in the house, in my son. Evan stood near the doorway, hands pressed hard against his ears, shoulders trembling. His hair, overgrown again, hung over his eyes, hiding the panic I knew was there. He was tall now, nearly shoulder to shoulder with his father, but at that moment he looked fragile, breakable. He rocked forward and back, a rhythm that had carried him through childhood storms, but tonight it felt off, faster, sharper, unstable. "Is it the noise?" I whispered. He didn't answer. The dishwasher hummed in the kitchen, a car passed outside, someone's dog barked 2 houses over. None of it seemed loud enough to trigger him, but something was wrong. He lifted his head slightly, and for a split second, I saw his eyes, wide, glassy, pleading. "Make it stop! Make it stop! Make it stop!" The words came out in a loop, trembling. My breath froze. I walked toward him slowly, the way his therapist had taught us. "Buddy, I'm here," I said softly. "Can you look at me?" He didn't, but he didn't pull away either. So I knelt down beside him and placed my hand lightly on his back. He flinched, but he didn't run. Small victories, even now. My husband, Mark, stepped into the doorway, eyes tired from a 10-hour shift. He looked at Evan, then at me. We exchanged that silent, exhausted conversation parents like us knew too well. Do we call the therapist? Do we brace for a meltdown? Do we wait? Do we intervene? Are we messing this up? Again? Evan's breathing grew louder, faster, shallow. His fists clenched. His rocking became violent. "Okay, it's happening," Mark whispered. My chest tightened. Every meltdown felt like stepping into a storm with no map, only love and desperation to guide us. I reached for the small object on the table, Evan's old blue stress ball. It was faded, peeling, almost falling apart. But it had history. It had memories. It had saved us before. "Look what I found," I said gently, holding it near him. His eyes flickered. For one breath, one small miracle of a moment, he paused. His fingers twitched, reached, closed around it. The rocking slowed. Sometimes growth is microscopic. Sometimes it's the smallest thread keeping everything from collapsing. But then, something changed. His grip tightened so hard the ball compressed flat. He jerked backward, his body stiffened, his breathing turned into sharp, painful gasps. He wasn't just overwhelmed, he wasn't just overstimulated, he was terrified. "Mom, I can't. I can't. I can't." A meltdown hit. Not loud, not explosive, not like when he was younger. This one was silent, internal, far more dangerous. His body folded into mine, shaking uncontrollably. 13 years old, as tall as a young man, but suddenly small enough to fit in my lap again. And all I could think was, why is this happening now? What triggered it? What did we miss? After 20 agonizing minutes, his breathing steadied, his muscles loosened, his eyes softened, tired, red, but calmer. He didn't speak, just leaned against my chest, sweaty hair sticking to his forehead. I held him tighter than I had in years. Mark sat beside us on the floor, silent. For a moment, we were just three people breathing the same shaky breath. Then Evan whispered something I almost didn't catch. "School. I can't go back." My stomach dropped. "What happened at school?" I asked. He didn't answer, but the fear in his eyes told me the truth. Something happened, something big, something he didn't have the words for yet. And whatever it was, what happened next changed everything. The next morning, the house felt different, heavy, like the night hadn't fully ended. The smell of burnt toast lingered from my failed attempt at breakfast. Sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, highlighting dust motes that danced lazily in the quiet. Evan sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched, staring at a bowl of cereal he hadn't touched. The silence between bites was louder than any scream. Mark sipped his coffee, eyes tired, scanning the local news on his phone. He glanced at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the raw exhaustion mirrored in his expression. We had spent years learning routines, anticipating triggers, planning therapy sessions. But last night, none of it had mattered. We were unprepared, and that realization hung over us like a storm cloud refusing to move on. I knelt beside Evan, careful not to startle him. "Honey, do you want to tell me about yesterday?" I asked softly. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he traced the edge of his cereal bowl with a finger, small circles forming as if drawing his thoughts out. I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor of his hands. Finally, he whispered, I yelled at Miss Jacobs. I lost it." His words came haltingly, fragmented, each one a heavy stone in the kitchen air. My chest tightened. Miss Jacobs, his fifth-grade teacher, was patient. She'd sent countless emails praising his progress, his imagination, his curiosity. And yet something had happened yesterday, something that shattered his carefully constructed bubble of safety. I wanted to reach out to her immediately, but I knew he needed me first, not the school, not anyone else, just me. Mark reached across the table, placing his hand gently on Evan's shoulder. He said, "It's okay, buddy. Everyone has hard days. You're still learning, still trying, and we're here." But Evan flinched slightly, recoiling into himself. The reassurance he'd once accepted without question now seemed distant, almost unreachable. I watched my son struggle to articulate the storm inside him. It was familiar to us, but only because we had learned to read between his silences. The day before, he had held on to me like a child, And tonight, he would barely speak. Every emotion was amplified: fear, confusion, guilt. I wanted to tell him it was okay to feel it all, that no one expected him to be perfect. But my words felt hollow against the weight of his anxiety. After breakfast, we prepared for school. The routine should have been simple, predictable. Shoes by the door, backpack on his shoulders, lunch packed in neat little containers. But today, the usual comfort of routine felt fragile. Evan walked slowly, dragging his backpack like it was a burden heavier than the world. When we reached the car, he paused at the driveway, staring at the street as if it were a river too wide to cross. "Do you want me to drive you, or do you want to walk to school?" I asked gently, trying not to make it a choice, but a support. He shook his head, silent. Mark opened the passenger door and crouched slightly so their eyes met. "We'll be right here, okay? All day if you need us," he said softly. Evan nodded, a small gesture, but enough to show he heard, enough to keep us tethered to hope. The drive to school was quiet, too quiet. Only the hum of the tires on asphalt filled the car. Outside, autumn leaves swirled in the wind, golden and red, falling gently to the ground. To anyone else, it would have been a beautiful scene. To us, it was a backdrop to tension, a calm surface hiding a storm below. When we arrived at school, Evan hesitated at the car door. I could see the inner battle, fight or flight, the push and pull he'd faced since childhood. Mark and I exchanged a glance. We had rehearsed this moment countless times. Deep breaths, gentle voices, patience. But rehearsals never fully prepare you for raw fear. I opened the car door slowly. "Let's try it together," I whispered. I took his hand, Mark followed, placing a reassuring hand on his back. Together, we walked up the path toward the school, each step a careful negotiation between control and freedom, safety and exposure. Inside the classroom, the fluorescent lights seemed brighter than usual, buzzing faintly above. The other children were busy at their desks, oblivious to the storm quietly following Evan. Mrs. Jacobs knelt by his seat, eyes warm, arms open. "Evan, welcome back," she said gently. He froze for a moment, unsure, scanning the room. Then slowly he moved toward his desk, carrying the weight of yesterday's meltdown like a backpack of stones. We stayed a few minutes, silently observing, ensuring he could settle. His breathing gradually slowed. Small gestures, a pencil held correctly, a page turned, showed progress. But the tension never fully left his shoulders. Mark and I exchanged another glance, a silent acknowledgement. Growth is slow, recovery is fragile, and love is relentless. As we drove home later, the silence in the car was heavy, but not oppressive. Evan stared out the window at the passing houses, leaves swirling, his mind elsewhere. Mark reached over, resting a hand on mine. He said, "We'll get there." And I nodded, knowing the road ahead would be long, uncertain, but worth every struggle. Because in every quiet moment, every shaky breath, every hesitant step, we were still a family weathering storms that no one else could fully see. And we would keep walking this path together, even when it seemed impossible. What happened next would test our limits and show us just how far love could stretch. That evening, the house felt heavier than usual. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the living room, and the faint hum of the refrigerator sounded like a distant storm. Evan sat on the floor, knees drawn up, staring at his favorite puzzle pieces, carefully fitting them together as if arranging the world in perfect order could calm the chaos inside him. I watched him, heart tight, remembering the days when he was smaller, when his tiny hands had trembled in frustration at the simplest tasks. Now, even as a preteen, the anxiety still shadowed him, heavier, more persistent. Mark entered the room, holding a stack of mail, some of it bills, some notes from school. He sat down quietly beside Evan, careful not to startle him. "Looks like we have a few notes from the school again," he murmured, flipping through the papers. I could see the tension in his jaw, the same tension I felt mirrored in my own chest. Each letter seemed like a judgment, a reminder that we were constantly under scrutiny, constantly being tested as parents. Evan didn't look up. His fingers traced the edges of the puzzle pieces obsessively, over and over. I could see the way his body stiffened, the small tremor in his hands, the rapid blink of his eyes. I wanted to step in, to take control, but I knew better. Any sudden movement could trigger a meltdown. Instead, I took a deep breath, letting the silence fill the room with patience, letting him know we were present, steady. Finally, he spoke, a whisper, almost drowned out by the hum of the refrigerator. I hate school," he said. The words fell heavy in the room, raw and unfiltered. "They don't understand me, and I mess up everything." My throat tightened. Every parent wants to protect their child from pain. But this was beyond my reach. Mark put a hand gently on Evan's shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. School is hard sometimes. But you're trying, and that matters." Evan flinched slightly, pulling back, then slowly returned the contact, as if testing whether safety still existed. His trust was fragile, built piece by piece over years, and yesterday's incident had shaken it. I knelt on the floor opposite him, matching his eye level. "Do you want to tell me what happened with your friends?" I asked softly. Evan's lips trembled. They laughed when I couldn't answer the question," he stammered. His voice cracked and tears pooled in his eyes. Mark's hand tightened on mine, a silent anchor. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to remain calm for him. We spent the next hour together, piecing together the events of the day, carefully untangling the threads of fear, shame, and frustration. Every detail mattered: the tone of the teacher's voice, the laughter of peers, the way he had frozen in his seat. We tried to make sense of it together, offering understanding, empathy, and reassurance. Every small word, every patient pause was a lifeline. Later, when Evan retreated to his room, Mark and I sat in the dim light of the living room, exhausted. "How did we get here?" I whispered, more to myself than him. "We've done everything. Therapy, routines, but it's still not enough." Mark shook his head, eyes distant, haunted by the same doubts. "We're doing everything we can. That's all anyone can do." The tension between us was quiet but palpable. Parenting a child with autism had tested every fiber of our marriage. Every disagreement about therapy schedules, educational plans, or how to respond to a meltdown had chipped away at our patience. Yet, despite the strain, we returned to each other, bound by the shared love for our son and the unspoken promise that we would face every storm together. That night, after Evan fell asleep, we tiptoed into his room to check on him. His breathing was uneven, a subtle rhythm of tension and relief. I brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, feeling the weight of every year, every struggle, every silent tear we had shared. Mark rested his hand over mine, and in that quiet moment, we were reminded why we fought so hard, Why every therapy session, every sleepless night, every setback mattered. Sleep didn't come easy. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the low hum of the heating system. Mark and I sat in the living room, sharing a cup of lukewarm tea, talking quietly about strategies, therapies, and the upcoming IEP meeting. Our voices were soft, careful not to wake Evan, but every word carried urgency. Every decision mattered. Every choice felt like a life raft in a turbulent sea. As the clock ticked past midnight, I realized something profound. Our battles were not just for today or tomorrow, but for Evan's future, for his ability to navigate a world that often felt unforgiving. And yet, despite the exhaustion, the fear, and the relentless pressure, a quiet hope lingered. Hope that one day Evan's world would feel less heavy. Hope that we would survive every meltdown, every judgment, every moment of despair. But even as hope flickered, a new challenge loomed. The next day promised more school trials, more social tests, and another glimpse into the reality of parenting a child whose mind worked differently than everyone else's. And deep down, we knew this journey was far from over. What happened next would force us to confront not only Evan's struggles, but our own fears in ways we had never imagined. The morning was gray, a steady drizzle tapping against the windows, making the world outside feel distant and muted. Evan refused breakfast, retreating to his corner with his tablet, headphones clamped over his ears. The faint hum of his favorite white noise app was supposed to soothe him, but even that couldn't mask the tension in the house. I glanced at Mark, who was on a conference call, trying to mask his frustration with polite nods and quiet murmurs. By 8:30 a.m., we were already running late for school. I tried to guide Evan into his coat, gentle but firm, when he stiffened, his gaze darting toward the door. I can't, he whispered. His voice trembled, and a familiar wave of panic rippled through him. This wasn't a typical morning meltdown. It was deeper, a panic tied to something he hadn't yet named. Mark hung up his call and came over. "What's happening?" he asked, crouching beside him. Evan's hands trembled, pulling at the sleeves of his jacket. They changed the schedule. New class. Miss Harper isn't teaching today," he stammered. The shift had been minor, to most children invisible, but for Evan it was seismic. Routine was everything. Any disruption felt like the floor being ripped out from under him. We tried every technique we had practiced for years. Deep breaths, counting, gentle pressure on his shoulders, calm words repeated over and over. Nothing worked. His body shook, eyes darting, lips quivering. I felt my own panic rising, the helplessness clawing at my chest. This wasn't just a school problem. It was a test of everything we had learned, everything we had endured. Finally, we called the school and Miss Harper came to the rescue. She knelt beside Evan, her calm voice threading through his panic. "It's okay, Evan. We'll figure it out together. You're safe here." Slowly, almost painfully, he allowed himself to be led to the car, but the tension lingered like static electricity in the air. The drive to school was silent, save for the steady tapping of the windshield wipers. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, and I stared out the window, the blur of passing streetlights echoing the blur of my thoughts. We were exhausted, drained, and yet hyper-alert, waiting for the next sign of distress. At school, a new challenge awaited. The IEP meeting had been rescheduled without much notice, and the counselor wanted to discuss Evan's progress and his recent setbacks in front of the entire team. As we sat at the long table, surrounded by teachers, therapists, and administrators, I felt the weight of judgment pressing down on me. Every word, every glance seemed scrutinizing. I could see Mark's jaw tighten across the table, mirroring my own fear. The meeting was tense. Evan sat beside us, headphones in, body stiff. The counselor spoke first, outlining his academic progress, but then gently mentioned social challenges, sensory difficulties, and the recent panic at the schedule change. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't the criticism. It was the stark reality of how much work remained, how fragile the balance was between success and meltdown. Mark finally spoke, his voice steady but soft. "We understand Evan has challenges. We're committed to helping him navigate them. We're asking for collaboration, not just evaluation."
The room went quiet for a moment, and I felt a tiny flicker of relief. This was our life, a constant negotiation, a delicate dance of advocacy, patience, and hope. After the meeting, Evan retreated to a quiet corner of the classroom. I watched him from the doorway, noting the tension in his shoulders and the subtle tremor of his hands. The teachers whispered that he was doing better than some thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every day held the potential for another crisis. When we returned home, the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and humid. Evan sat by the window, staring at the dripping leaves. I approached cautiously, sitting beside him. He didn't speak at first, just leaned against my shoulder, seeking comfort. "I hate it when things change," he finally admitted. My heart ached. That simple sentence carried years of struggle, months of therapy, countless sleepless nights. Mark joined us, wrapping an arm around both of us. "We'll get through it together," he said softly. And in that moment, I realized that even though we were battered by constant challenges, our unity, our love for Evan and each other, was the strongest tool we had. But the day wasn't over. Later, I noticed Evan flinch at the sound of the mail slot slamming, and I knew a new obstacle was waiting, one that would test not only his resilience, but ours as parents. A reminder that no matter how far we thought we had come, every day held a new trial, a new moment that could unravel the fragile calm we had built. The following morning dawned bright and deceptively cheerful, the sun spilling golden light into our kitchen, but for us, the brightness felt heavy, almost ironic. Evan had woken up unusually quiet, his small fingers tracing patterns on the edge of the table. I tried to engage him with his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, but he pushed the plate away, eyes wide and restless. Mark arrived just as I was kneeling beside him, gently guiding him toward the table. "We've got to eat, Evan. Just a few bites," he said softly, but Evan's small frame tensed. It wasn't hunger he resisted. It was the unpredictability of the day. Today was the day of the annual fire drill, and even the thought of alarms and sudden chaos made his chest tighten. As we drove to school, Evan's hands gripped the seat, knuckles pale. I tried light conversation, speaking of clouds and the trees swaying in the wind, but his gaze remained fixed on some invisible point beyond the windshield. Mark glanced at me, a flicker of worry crossing his features. "Do you think he'll make it through the drill?" he asked, voice low. I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. Every year the drills brought panic, even after months of preparation. When we arrived, the office staff were cheerful, unaware of the storm brewing in one small boy. Evan clutched my hand tightly as we walked to his classroom. The teacher gave a reassuring nod, but even her calm couldn't pierce the tension in his body. I whispered a familiar phrase we had used countless times. "You're safe. I'm right here." He flinched at the sound of the intercom, and I knew the alarm could trigger a full meltdown any second. The first bell rang, and the class continued normally. But then, the loud wail of the fire drill sounded, echoing through the halls like a siren. Evan froze, every muscle rigid, his breath short and sharp. He bolted from his desk, ignoring protests, running toward the corner where he felt safest.
The teacher followed quickly, guiding him with gentle hands, but his panic was visceral. I felt a lump rise in my throat, my heart thudding painfully. Mark had called the school in advance, explaining Evan's sensitivity, but even with preparation, reality never matched expectation. We watched from the doorway as Evan curled on the floor, tears streaming down his face. His body trembled like a leaf in the wind. The alarm continued its shrill wail, unrelenting. I felt helpless, knowing there was no immediate fix. Only patience, only presence. After what felt like an eternity, the drill ended and Evan remained on the floor, exhausted but slowly calming. I knelt beside him, holding his small hand. "You did it," I whispered, each word soaked in truth and relief. "You made it through." He looked up at me, eyes glassy, and managed a faint nod. It wasn't victory in the traditional sense, but it was survival, and sometimes survival was everything. At home, the emotional weight lingered. Mark and I sat in the quiet kitchen, cups of untouched coffee between us. "It never gets easier, does it?" he murmured. I shook my head, feeling the raw exhaustion seep into my bones. Each challenge left a mark, not just on Evan, but on us as parents, testing the limits of patience, love, and understanding. Later, I noticed Evan quietly lining up his small action figures along the windowsill, a ritual that always helped him regain control. I watched silently, marveling at his resilience, even in the aftermath of panic. Each careful placement of a toy was a reclaiming of order from chaos, a tiny act of courage that often went unseen by the world outside our home. Mark joined us, sitting on the floor beside Evan. "I know it's hard, but you're stronger than you realize." Evan's small fingers lingered on a figure of a superhero, and I felt a twinge of hope. Maybe these small victories, unnoticed by others, are what would carry him forward. As the evening shadows stretched long and the house settled into quiet, I reflected on how each day brought new fears, but also small triumphs. There was no magic fix, no sudden cure, only the slow, painstaking process of understanding, supporting, and loving Evan through every tremor of uncertainty.
But deep in my chest, I knew that the challenges were far from over. The next day could bring a sensory overload in the grocery store, a social conflict on the playground, or a sudden shift at home that would test all of our strength. Life with Evan was a constant tightrope walk, a blend of panic and perseverance. What happened next would challenge our understanding of Evan's world and push us as parents to face fears we hadn't yet dared to name. The weekend arrived, but rest didn't. Even in the quiet of our suburban home, tension hummed like an uninvited guest. Evan had developed a new routine, repeating the same phrases over and over, a loop that could last for hours. At first it seemed manageable, almost endearing, but soon it became exhausting. Every word he repeated chipped away at our patience, leaving Mark and me emotionally frayed. I found him in the living room, kneeling on the carpet with his hands pressed against his ears. The television was off, the room silent, yet he rocked back and forth, muttering the same line over and over. "I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go." My heart clenched. The words weren't about school or an activity. They were about a fear we couldn't immediately name. Mark crouched beside him, trying to speak softly. "Hey, buddy, it's okay. We're right here. You're safe." But Evan flinched at every syllable, eyes darting toward the door as if danger was waiting just beyond it. I felt my throat tighten, helplessness washing over me in waves. How could we comfort him when the fear wasn't even clear to us? We tried distractions, his favorite music, a puzzle, even the promise of a short walk outside. Nothing worked. The repeated phrases continued, rhythmic, relentless, a haunting echo that filled the house. I sat on the floor across from him, knees drawn to my chest, trying to breathe through the panic that threatened to swallow me whole. Mark sat beside me, silently holding my hand, offering the only anchor we could find in this storm. Hours passed. The sunlight shifted through the blinds, shadows stretching across the floor, but Evan remained trapped in his loop. I watched him, trying to understand what he felt, what invisible weight pressed him to the floor. Sometimes it was easy to forget that he wasn't being difficult on purpose. This was the way his mind protected him, his nervous system screaming in a language we were only beginning to learn. Finally, in a rare, delicate moment, he stopped, just for a second. His eyes met mine, wide and shimmering. "Mom, stay," he whispered. It wasn't a full sentence, but it was enough. I crawled closer, placing my hand over his trembling fingers. "I'm right here, Evan. I'm not going anywhere." His lips quivered, a tear sliding down his cheek, and for the first time that day, I felt a fragile sense of connection.
Mark joined us, placing his arm around both of us. The three of us sat there, a small island of calm in a sea of sensory chaos. I realized in that moment that progress wasn't always measured by the big victories, the first words, the first step, the first smile, but by these tiny moments of trust when Evan allowed us to share his world, even just a little. Later, at dinner, he ate quietly, still tense, but more grounded. We exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the toll the day had taken on all of us. Our exhaustion was deep, our nerves raw, but beneath it a current of hope pulsed. Evan had allowed us in, even in his fear, and that was a start. After bedtime, Mark and I sat in the dimly lit living room, the silence thick but necessary. "I hate that we can't fix this for him," I murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "I know, but maybe we don't need to fix it. Maybe we just need to be here, every time, no matter what." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Being a parent of an autistic child wasn't about solutions. It was about endurance, presence, and the courage to sit with discomfort without flinching. The next morning brought no guarantees. Each day with Evan was unpredictable, a mix of fear, frustration, and fleeting triumphs. But I understood something crucial. Our resilience as parents was entwined with his, and the more we endured, the more he learned to endure too. Even as I whispered him awake for school, helping him into his carefully chosen clothes, guiding him through each step of his morning routine, I knew that today could bring a meltdown, a sensory overload, or a breakthrough we weren't ready for. And still, we moved forward, inch by inch, breath by breath, heart by heart. What happened next would push us into a new realm of challenges, where fear, hope, and love collided in ways we could never have imagined, and forced us to question everything we thought we knew about Evan and ourselves. The evening air was thick with tension as we drove home from Evan's therapy session. The car smelled faintly of antiseptic from the clinic, mingling with the lingering scent of Mark's coffee. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Evan stared out the window, fingers tapping rhythmically against his leg, humming a melody only he seemed to hear. "Did you notice him during group today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He
He tried to join the others, but when someone bumped into him, he just froze. It took 15 minutes to calm him down. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight. That was progress, in a sense, but every victory came with its own avalanche of exhaustion. At home, the tension didn't ease. As soon as Evan stepped through the door, the familiar rituals began. Shoes in a precise row, his backpack in the exact corner, his sensory toy in hand. One misstep, one slight variation in routine, and the day could unravel. Dinner was another test. Evan refused the spaghetti I had prepared, claiming the noodles were too weakly. We tried to negotiate, offering alternatives, but his little body stiffened, his hands gripping the table edge. His outburst wasn't loud, but it was precise, a controlled, pinpointed anxiety that left both Mark and me on edge. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I just don't know how to handle it anymore. I feel like I'm failing him, failing us. His words hit me harder than any meltdown ever could. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but there was no magic reassurance that could erase this constant pressure. After Evan retreated to his room, we sat at the kitchen table, eating in silence, each bite mechanical. I watched Mark's shoulders slump, and I knew that the weight of parenting an autistic child had shifted from being emotional to physical. Nights spent awake, mornings filled with tension, therapy bills stacking up, the constant balancing act. It all pressed down like gravity. Then came the email from the school. Another change to Evan's IEP, this time requesting an additional aid during lunchtime. The note read in clinical language, Evan's social interactions remain limited. Increased support recommended. I read it twice, then pressed my face to my hands. Support was good, yes, but it also reminded me that every day at school was another battlefield for him. We spent the evening planning, revising schedules, coordinating with therapists, juggling appointments. Even as Mark and I argued softly over logistics, we were both silently terrified that our arguments, however small, would affect Evan's fragile sense of stability. As midnight approached, I finally crept into Evan's room. He lay on his side, curled around his favorite stuffed animal, eyes half open, still humming softly. I knelt beside him, gently stroking his hair. I'm here, Evan, I whispered. Always. He pressed his small hand into mine, and for a fleeting second, all the stress, all the fear, all the exhaustion seemed worth it. Mark joined me, wrapping an arm around both of us. We stayed there, silent, listening to the faint hum of the night, feeling the unspoken bond between the three of us. It was fragile, yes, but it was real. Just as we began to leave, Evan spoke in a quiet, trembling voice. Don't leave. Don't leave me alone. His words struck like lightning. In that instant, I realized that no matter how much we planned, no matter how many therapists, aides, or routines we had, the truth remained that Evan needed us to be present emotionally and physically every single moment. We held him close, feeling the tiny, rapid beat of his heart against ours. It was both terrifying and grounding, a reminder that love in this family wasn't measured in easy victories, but in the endurance of difficult days. What happened next would challenge every ounce of patience and courage we had, forcing us to face realities about Evan, about ourselves, and the unpredictable journey that lay ahead in ways we had never prepared for. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft lines across the living room floor. Evan was already awake, sitting cross-legged with his headphones on, lost in the world of recorded sounds that comforted him. I watched him from the doorway,
feeling a mix of awe and exhaustion. He had grown so much, yet every day still felt like navigating a minefield. Mark was in the kitchen, scrolling through emails with a worried frown. "Another call from school," he muttered. "They're saying Evan's having difficulty in group assignments again. They want to increase one-on-one support during class projects." I sank into a chair, running my hands over my face. The constant meetings, the endless forms, the arguments with teachers, it was relentless. And yet, we couldn't ignore it. Evan depended on us to be his advocates, his shield, his steady anchor. After breakfast, we drove to the school. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and car exhaust. Inside the classroom, Evan clung to my hand, his eyes darting nervously between desks, classmates, and the teacher. I whispered, "It's okay, baby. I'm right here." The teacher, trying to be diplomatic, explained that group work was meant to improve social skills. But for Evan, it was overwhelming. The chatter, the movement, the unstructured noise. His small body tensed, fists clenching, and I could feel his panic radiating like electricity through my own nerves. "Maybe we can try shorter sessions, just a few minutes at a time," I suggested. My voice was calm, though inside I felt like I was holding back a storm. Mark added quietly, "And let's ensure he has a safe corner where he can retreat if it becomes too much." Evan's breathing quickened. He muttered, almost to himself, "Too loud, too many, can't," and his tiny frame shook with suppressed frustration. The teacher nodded, taking notes, but I could see her unease. In the world of standardized classrooms, there was little room for a child who experienced life so differently.
Back in the car, Evan rested his head on my shoulder, still trembling. I stroked his hair, whispering reassurances. "We've got this, baby. We're always here." Mark drove in silence, eyes fixed on the road, but hands gripping the wheel tightly. That evening, we sat together at the dining table, exhausted from appointments, school meetings, and emotional drain. Evan played quietly with his toys, while Mark and I tried to discuss future strategies. But our conversation kept circling back to worry, therapy costs, the pressure on our marriage, and the constant need to shield Evan from judgment. I felt tears welling up and quickly brushed them away. I hate that he has to struggle like this," I said softly. "Every day feels like a test I'm failing." Mark reached for my hand. "We're not failing him. We're learning, adapting. That's what counts." But deep down, both of us knew the challenges were far from over. Evan's world was expanding, but so were the obstacles. Social expectations, school rules, public opinions, all pressing on him, on us, relentlessly. Later that night, as we tucked him into bed, Evan whispered, "Don't leave me, Mommy. Don't leave me, Daddy." His voice was small but filled with urgency. We held him tightly, promising silently that we never would. As we left the room, I realized something new had emerged from today's chaos. Despite the struggles, the meltdowns, the exhaustion, there was also a quiet resilience in Evan, a spark of determination that mirrored our own. We were no longer just surviving, we were learning to fight, to endure, and to hope. But just as we began to feel a sense of fragile equilibrium, a sudden phone call from the school's special education coordinator shattered the tentative calm. "There's been an incident during recess," she said. "Evan's meltdown escalated. They're requesting an urgent parent meeting tomorrow." My stomach dropped. Mark's hand found mine instinctively, both of us bracing for the storm. In that moment, I understood something profound. Parenting Evan was not a linear journey. Every step forward could be met with an unexpected setback, every small victory shadowed by new challenges. And yet, amidst the fear, the uncertainty, the relentless pressure, one thing remained clear. We would face it together. Every therapy session, every IEP meeting, every sleepless night was part of a single, unbroken fight. We were his anchors, his warriors, and we would never abandon him.
What happened next would push us to confront not only Evan's struggles, but the limits of our own endurance, forcing us to discover reserves of courage, patience, and love we never knew existed. The sun had barely risen when I woke to the sound of Evan humming softly in his room, a sound that usually meant he was calm, but today it carried a tense undercurrent. His small hands gripped a worn blanket as he moved in circles on the floor, a sign that the earlier meltdown at school had left lingering anxiety. I slipped out of bed and knelt beside him, careful not to startle him. "Hey, baby, Mommy's here. Daddy's here. You're safe." Mark joined me moments later, rubbing his eyes, but wearing a determined expression. "We'll figure this out," he murmured, as if saying it aloud could somehow make it true. School meetings were never easy, but today felt heavier. The coordinator, stern but caring, outlined the incident. Evan had refused to participate in a group game, his agitation escalating until a teacher had to intervene. They wanted more restrictive measures, a separate classroom for safety. I felt my chest tighten. The idea of isolating him went against everything we believed about inclusion, but I knew too well the toll these meltdowns took on him. We spent the rest of the morning reviewing therapy schedules, adjusting strategies, and weighing options. Every decision felt like a knife's edge. One misstep could send Evan spiraling. And yet, through it all, I caught glimpses of his resilience. He could now verbalize small frustrations, ask for breaks in his own words, and even tolerate short bursts of group interaction. By mid-afternoon, Evan was calmer, sitting at the kitchen table with crayons and paper. He drew circles and lines, meticulously coloring within shapes, then paused to show me. "Look," he said softly, eyes bright, "I did it." Mark smiled, placing his hand gently on mine. "That's our boy. Little victories matter more than they realize." Later, as we walked through the neighborhood park, the crisp fall air carrying the scent of damp leaves, I noticed Evan's attention to detail, the way a leaf curled, the sound of birds overhead, the texture of bark under his fingers. To an outsider, it might have seemed obsessive, but to us, it was a sign of his unique perception, his way of connecting with the world on his own terms. Yet, just as we started to feel a fragile sense of hope, the shadows of exhaustion and fear returned. Evan froze in the middle of the path, flinching at the laughter of nearby children. His breathing grew shallow, shoulders tense. I knelt before him, holding his hands gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby. We're right here."
Mark's voice joined mine, soft but firm. "You can handle this. You're safe with us." Minutes passed before Evan's trembling eased, but the moment lingered in our minds like a warning. The road ahead was still unpredictable, filled with triggers we couldn't always foresee. School, social interactions, public spaces, each held potential for overwhelming him. Each required constant vigilance. That evening, as we prepared dinner, Evan quietly repeated phrases we had taught him for self-soothing. I watched him,
tears welling as he practiced words that might one day help him navigate a world that often felt too loud, too fast, too complicated. Mark caught my eye across the room, his own expression heavy with emotion. In that silent exchange, we both understood the stakes. We were raising a child whose brilliance and challenges existed side by side, inseparable, and our love had to stretch further than we ever imagined. After tucking Evan into bed, he whispered, "Don't leave me, Mommy. Don't leave me, Daddy." The words, once repeated in fear, now carried a quiet strength. We held him close, promising in our hearts that we would never abandon him, no matter the struggles. As the house finally fell silent, Mark and I sat in the dim living room, exhaustion pressing down, yet a new awareness settling between us. Our journey with Evan was no longer just about managing meltdowns or therapy schedules. It was about understanding him, celebrating small victories, and preparing for the inevitable challenges that lay ahead. And then a call from a neighboring parent jolted us from our fragile calm. She said, "You need to hear this," she said urgently. "Evan was upset again today, but something happened that changed everything at school. You should come immediately." My heart raced. Mark's hand found mine, our fingers intertwined tightly. We both knew that this was not just another incident. It was a turning point. The next hours would demand every ounce of courage, patience, and love we could muster. What happened next would challenge everything we thought we knew about Evan and about ourselves. It was a moment that would redefine the meaning of hope, struggle, and family. The call from school had shaken us, but as we drove through the familiar suburban streets, the autumn air crisp against the windshield, I felt a mix of dread and cautious hope. Evan sat in the back seat, quietly flipping through a small book, his legs bouncing with nervous energy. Mark kept glancing at me, eyes shadowed with worry, but a spark of determination lingered there too. At the school, the coordinator met us with a solemn expression, yet beneath it, a glimmer of something unexpected. "He surprised everyone today," she said, guiding us to a small classroom. There was a moment where he managed to self-soothe and redirect his frustration entirely on his own. It was brief, but it was a breakthrough.
We stepped inside, slowly. Evan sat on a colorful mat, head slightly bowed, hands clasped tightly. He looked up when he heard us, and in that instant, the weight of years, the sleepless nights, the endless therapy appointments, the meltdowns, the judgment pressed against my chest. But there he was, our boy, showing a strength we had often feared was beyond him. I knelt beside him, feeling the soft fabric of his shirt under my fingers, inhaling the familiar scent of soap and hair gel. "Evan," I whispered, "we're so proud of you." Mark crouched on the other side, his hand resting on Evan's shoulder. "You did something amazing today, buddy. You showed everyone how strong you are." Evan's small lips curved into a tentative smile, the kind that lights up a room, but we knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, moments of fear, moments when the world felt too loud, too fast. But for now, the breakthrough, however small, was enough to remind us of why we had never given up. Later that evening, we returned home, a gentle rain falling outside, tapping against the windows like a soft, comforting rhythm. Evan curled up on the couch with a blanket, quietly drawing shapes and colors, humming to himself. I watched him, the soft glow of the lamp highlighting his features, the determination in his eyes, the subtle quirks that made him uniquely him. Mark poured 2 cups of tea, handing me one. We sat together, the house quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the heater and the distant patter of rain. "Do you think we finally see the light at the end of the tunnel?" I asked softly, the weight of years of struggle and fear lingering in my voice. Mark sipped his tea, thoughtful. "I think we see a glimpse. It's not perfect, not yet, but it's real, and it's ours. As the night deepened, Evan called from the couch, "Mom? Dad? Stay with me?" The request, simple and direct, carried more weight than words could capture. We joined him, sitting together, holding him close, feeling the warmth of family and the fragile, enduring strength that had carried us through every obstacle. In that quiet moment, I realized the truth we had learned over the years. Love was not a shield from struggle, but the force that gave us courage to face it. Each meltdown, each school challenge, each anxious night had tested us, but it had also taught us resilience, patience, and the unshakable bond between parent and child. Evan drifted to sleep in our arms, small hands clutching our fingers, and we stayed with him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The world outside remained unpredictable, the future uncertain, but in that room, in that moment, hope felt tangible. Not the kind of miraculous, instantaneous fix we had once imagined, but the steady, enduring kind, the kind that grows in quiet victories, in understanding, in love that refuses to let go. As we finally stepped into our own room, exhausted but full of gratitude, Mark whispered, "We're warriors, all three of us, and we always will be." I nodded, tears brimming, knowing that this journey, with all its struggles, heartbreak, and triumphs, had shaped us into a family stronger than we ever imagined. And though the road ahead would continue to test us, we had learned to face it together, one day at a time, with hearts full of hope and hands held tight. The story of our lives with Evan was far from over, but for the first time in years, the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with love, understanding, and a promise of tomorrow.